Hi, I'm Debbie Harbeck, and I'm a certified life coach working with women in midlife and through the menopause transition. So each week, I'll be sharing the latest information, inspiration, and generate some momentum so you can move forward and feel more in control of your changing midlife body and your life. Let's go. So welcome to today's episode, which is the 50th episode of this podcast. And even as I say that, I can't quite believe it. I can't quite believe I've put out an episode a week for 50 weeks. To me, that's just incredible. It's an accomplishment for me, and for sure I'm celebrating. Today I am celebrating that. The fact that I've shown up here every week, that consistency, and just that I had the courage to start, because honestly at the beginning, and that's what took me 2 years, was I was afraid to start. I was afraid of the technology, which I didn't know very much about, which right now is super simple. I just have this microphone I'm speaking to you into and a simple software that's actually free to use. So that's pretty much all it took. And then I was also afraid that I'd have nothing to say after a couple of episodes, which obviously hasn't been true because here we are at number 50. And I was afraid that nobody would listen and that it would fail. And that also hasn't been true. I have a lot of people downloading this podcast every week, and I'm really thrilled about that. So I'm really glad I followed through. And I'm really glad that I've heard from a lot of you who have sent me positive feedback. It means so much to me. So it's the reason that I keep going, that I keep putting out episodes. And I know there's still a lot to say about this topic of midlife and menopause and perimenopause and this whole thing that we're going through. So I know that I've still got a lot to say. I've still got a lot of people to meet and interview about it. So I'm going to keep going for sure. And something I realized through all this is that I'm rarely disappointed when I follow through on something I really want to do, even if it fails. So it's just one of the great perspectives that midlife has given me. Maybe you've come to the same conclusion. Maybe you've noticed too that you're rarely disappointed when you do something you really wanted to do, yet you're frequently disappointed when you don't do that thing. So it's just a hard lesson sometimes, because yes, to do the thing you want to do is sometimes hard. It's sometimes something you don't even know how to do yet. But if you really want to do it, you end up figuring it out. And that's what I've learned, is I can always figure stuff out. And just that aspect of all of this is worth celebrating. Now, it doesn't mean that everything goes perfectly, because it never does. But it does mean that I believe in my ability to solve problems and to weather difficult times. And of course, to learn these things, I had to go through difficult times. I mean, starting this podcast is difficult, but I've been through many more difficult times. I've been through the death of my mother, a miscarriage, divorce, being laid off when I was a single mom, starting a business from scratch, so many more things. So I've done hard things, and I've gotten through them, and I believe now in my ability to do that. And it's good to look back, because all of these things are amazing gifts. The things that we think are really hard and we don't want to be going through are actually the things we learn the most from. They are gifts, and they are put in your path. They were put in my path to learn strength, to learn resilience, to learn to believe in myself. And of course, the gifts, they don't end, right? Failures and problems and difficulties, they continue to show up. They will always continue to show up. But with the more experience I get of these things, the more I know I can get through them. So armed with these things that I've learned in life, I started this podcast knowing I would stumble, but learn along the way. And I also made a point of celebrating along the way. So not only am I celebrating this relatively big milestone for me of 50 episodes, but I've also celebrated the smaller steps along the way. Like I celebrated myself a year ago when I figured out how to get a podcast out there. That was super exciting when I figured it out. I got very excited about that. I let myself get excited about it. And then I celebrated myself when I published that very first episode almost 52 weeks ago. And I celebrated this podcast when I hit 1,000 downloads, which was really meaningful to me. And I have big goals for this podcast, but I know the importance of celebrating each smaller step along the way. And I celebrate in my own way. It's nothing big. I don't throw a party. Usually what it looks like is a minute or so of just consciously feeling in my body how proud I am of myself, how that feels in me. And that usually leads me to smile, to have this huge smile on my face, actually, probably pretty goofy. I don't look in the mirror when I do this. I'll probably giggle, I'll laugh, and I'll do a little dance. Maybe I'll even hug myself. These are just little moments that I have that I allow myself to feel this celebration that comes with doing things that are meaningful to me, even if they're not meaningful to anybody else. If it feels like success to me, I celebrate it. And I even write it down. So something I do, and many of my clients have now done, is to keep a success journal. It's a journal where you just write down, no matter how small, the things that feel like success to you. So with my clients who want to lose weight, it's not about waiting until the weight is all gone to celebrate. It's about each small thing that leads to the result and that makes them feel proud, even if saying it to someone else would make it seem very small. So when they get through a weekend without a glass of wine, and that's what they really wanted to do, and it feels really good to them, they celebrate and they write it down. Or maybe when they say no to something they would normally say yes to out of habit or out of pleasing others, they celebrate that and they write it down. I mean, these sound like small things perhaps, but they are big deals in a lot of our lives when we're trying to get somewhere. And they're stumbling blocks in our way so often, but when we can get over them, we celebrate them, we write them down, and we remember it. So anytime that you do feel down or dragged down or very negative, it's a really good idea to go to this journal and read these things that you actually have done and celebrate in ways that feel good to you. So I shared my simple celebration, but sometimes it calls for something a little more significant. So maybe I'll go out for dinner or pick up my favorite tea at Starbucks, or get that book I've been really wanting, or get myself flowers even. I've done that before. Or maybe it's just going out for a walk and just being in that feeling for longer. With these 50 episodes, I'm smiling right now. I'm feeling that awesome feeling of accomplishment. I'm allowing myself to feel that, which is wonderful. I'm giving myself a pat on the back for a job well done, but I'm also know that it's not over. This is, again, just a step in that direction. In fact, maybe it's just another beginning. And another thing I like to do at times like this is to evaluate. It's something that I overlook sometimes, to be honest, but I really try to do this because it is so valuable. So I evaluate myself with 3 questions. I'm not sure I've talked about this on the podcast before, but whenever you try something new, or maybe you go through something particularly challenging, or even if you go on a vacation that didn't turn out the way you wanted it to, whatever the situation, it's helpful to evaluate in order to learn, but also to celebrate so that you can always see that something did go well in there. So that's the very first question out of the 3. It's what went well? What went well? It's a chance to notice, no matter how bad it seems, what actually did go well. There is good in every situation if you consciously look for it. So look for it and you will find it. It's always there. And I'm not being Pollyanna about this, but so often we find ourselves doing the opposite, where everything goes super well, and then you get the result you want, and then you look at all the things that really didn't go your way in the process. So our minds go to this negative place without any effort. So we've got to make the effort to see the good. And the good is always there when we look for it. I try to do this when I get off of meetings that didn't go the way I wanted them to go, or when I have a challenging conversation with someone, or many other things that feel hard or don't turn out the way I wanted them to. I try to find at least one good thing. It may take a few minutes to really find it, but I always push my mind to go there. And then I quietly celebrate that thing. And maybe I'll write it in my journal if I feel drawn to do that. It's a way of positively reinforcing things. And when we don't notice a positive, we end up only reinforcing the negative. So we want to positively reinforce what went well. And then you can ask yourself the next question, which is what didn't go so well? So here I can write down specific things that I wasn't happy about. And if I'm feeling particularly negative here, I try to limit those things to only 3. I don't want to have a whole long list of all the stuff that went badly and have one thing that went well. I just want to say, okay, what are the things that didn't go so well? Write down 3 things that are very specific. And that's important too, because you can just have a feeling that things didn't go so well, but write down something specific that didn't go so well. Be very specific. And finally, I asked myself, what would I do differently? So I want to learn something here. So I think about at least one thing I could do differently. It makes me realize that no matter what happens ever, there's always something to learn and something that can help me move forward and that I can do better. So, for example, this week I've been reflecting on this podcast. And so I thought first about what went well. And there have honestly been a lot of things that did go well. So it's been easy in that way. And I've been appreciating and celebrating the facts that I had the courage to start this podcast last July, that I've been consistent with it, even when it was hard. It's not easy to be consistent. So I need to celebrate and appreciate that. That I learned a lot about interviewing since I decided to interview guests, which wasn't my plan when I started this podcast. And I've met so many new people because I started doing that. That's been amazing. And I've even found a few new coaching clients, or maybe they actually found me thanks to the podcast. So these have been some amazing things that have happened that have gone really well since I started the podcast. But what didn't go so well? Well, I needed to do a lot of editing, especially on the interview podcasts, because of how repetitive I can be with the word yeah or no or I love that. These are things I had no idea that I say an awful lot. And so I had to do a lot of self-editing in the podcast to take out some of that so you don't get the full effect of it. But it was a good learning experience. I definitely learned that that's what I say, and I'm a lot more aware of not saying it. And I didn't hit my goal, actually, of how many people I wanted to reach in this first year. I didn't quite get there. So yeah, it's a little disappointing. It's part of the process. I did set a goal. I didn't hit it. Okay. So what will I do differently moving forward? That's the third question. Well, I'll do more work towards learning about interviewing and public speaking so that I help myself. Of course, just being aware, like I said, of the things that I do say and do repeat, that does help. But I want to learn more about all of this because I do find it fascinating. And the other thing I did was I looked at my goal for how many people I want to reach, and I've set a new goal for this year, understanding that growth takes time, obviously, and it's not a steady slope. But who knows? It may be an exponential slope. I don't know yet. So it's still fairly young. It's only the first year. But I have learned a lot, and these are the things I will focus on going into the next year. This next 50 episodes actually is like a new beginning. It's a recommitment to myself to keep going because it's something I'm proud of, and it's reaching many women. Even if I didn't hit my goal, it's still reaching a lot of women, and I've had a lot of positive feedback. So at this time in your life, can this be the beginning of something new or a time to celebrate for you? You know, I've talked about me and the podcast and the things I've celebrated and how to evaluate. So right now, is there something in your life that you need to do that with? Right now, it's July 3rd, and we just crossed the 6-month mark in 2024. So now maybe it's a really good time for you to rekindle your goals for the year or your resolutions that you made at the beginning of 2024. I think it's a good time to evaluate where you are and where you'd like to be in 6 months. So start with what's gone well and celebrate it. Write down the things that have gone well for you so far this year. And then write down the things that didn't go so well. Admit what they are and accept that they happened. It's okay. We all have things that didn't go well for us so far this year, I am sure, in the last 6 months. And then what are you going to do differently? So take what you've learned from the things that maybe didn't go so well and the things that did go well and use them to keep moving forward. Do things differently. And so I just want to raise a glass to the next 6 months. It doesn't have to be a glass of wine. It can be a glass of anything you want it to be. And also, I want to just raise my glass to the next 50 episodes of this podcast. And I just want to thank those of you who have sent in ideas for episodes and things you want to hear or learn more about. Please continue to send me these things that you would love to hear me talk about on the podcast. It really helps me to know that I'm directly speaking to you and sharing what's most valuable to you. And I know what's valuable to you will be valuable to others. So keep those ideas coming. And I hope you found this episode helpful and that you can celebrate and move forward on your journey, whatever that happens to be. And of course, I'm always here if you want a coach or a guide to be in your corner, to cheer for you, to help you find the next steps. I'm here for all of that. And with that, I'm so grateful that you chose to join me today and for these last 50 episodes. And if you enjoyed this particular episode, or if you learned something in any of these episodes, I'd love you to go onto Apple or Spotify or whatever platform you're using and share your takeaway from listening to this podcast this year. I would really, really appreciate it. It would be one way to celebrate me if you're if you're up to that, if you're willing to. And I'll be back next week with a fresh new episode and a guest. So keep moving forward, and bye for now. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Midlife Momentum Podcast. If you want to learn more about working with me, come visit me at debbieharbeckcoaching.com. That's Debbie, I-E, Harbeck with a C, coaching.com. See you next week.